Allahu, 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 Allah. Allahu, 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 Allah. Allahu, Allah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Welcome back to the Quranic Reflection Show. So just before the break, we were touching on the topic of diet and exercise. And in particular, Shaykh Nooruddin was speaking about the prophetic guidance regarding our diet and regarding our food as well, and what attitude we should have towards it. So now, inshallah, we'd like to touch on the topic of fasting and how we understand that it's a prophetic sunnah to be fasting on Mondays and Thursdays. And even now, there's sort of modern diets cropping up called the 5-2 diet, which I've seen myself, where they encourage you to fast 2 days a week and eat for 5 days a week because they deem this to be the most optimum lifestyle for a prolonged and healthy life. So inshallah, Siddhi, if we could try and elaborate on fasting and the benefits of it.
Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Rabbi yassir wa ya kareem. So fasting, other than the obligatory fast in Ramadan, the Prophet ﷺ encouraged nafal fast a great deal. Nafal fasting, we have so many hadith about different types of nafal fast. The fast of Ashura that we have in Muharram, the 2 days. Fasting, for example, the first 9 days in Dhul Hijjah. Fasting 6 days in Sha'wal. Fasting 3 days a month, which we spoke about earlier. And specific to what you've mentioned is fasting Mondays. We have many hadith about fasting on Mondays, and the Prophet ﷺ encouraging people to fast on Mondays, nafal fast.
Yeah.
And then also we have some sound hadith where the Prophet ﷺ encouraged fasting on Thursday. So this is, this 2 days a week, this has been a practice encouraged by the scholars from the earliest of time to fast, to have a regime of fasting Mondays or Mondays and Thursdays. And what they done with the various hadith I spoke about, the scholars, they mentioned different options. This is how they understood it from the Prophet ﷺ, that you have different options. Everybody should ideally, it's not an obligation, but ideally have a regime of nafal fasting. And that regime, many scholars, they said, obviously all scholars agreed the very best one is the fast of Dawood alayhi salam. And what is the fast of Dawood? This was mentioned in the hadith of Bukhari, the hadith of Bukhari that I quoted earlier. This long hadith, I didn't quote all of it, but at the end of it, the Prophet ﷺ spoke about the fast of Dawood alayhi salam, and this being the best fast, which is understood or as explained as being the practice of fasting a day and then leaving a day and then fasting a day and then leaving a day, and like this continuously. This is called the fast of Dawood alayhi salam. They all agreed that this is the best fast because the Prophet ﷺ mentioned this is the best fast. Okay, and so they said this is an option, which was rarely taken up. This considered really quite difficult to do. And then another option is to fast Mondays or Thursdays, and then another option to fast Mondays and Thursdays, 2 days a week. If a person is not able to do that much, then to fast 3 days a month. And specifically the 3 middle days of the lunar month is mentioned. So we have these various options that the scholars mentioned, but they encouraged, based on the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, a person to have a routine of nafal fasting. And this is considered one of the best routines, to fast Mondays and Thursdays every week, inshallah ta'ala. And if for one reason or another Mondays and Thursdays they're not possible, then to fast another 2 days during the week, inshallah ta'ala. So this is incredibly important. It's mentioned by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in multiple hadith. You also have a hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam quoted as saying sumu tasihhu, although this hadith is differed upon. Some scholars said this is a weak hadith. Okay, if it's a weak hadith, then this is hadith which is permitted to narrate, but it's not considered to be absolutely authenticated from the Prophet ﷺ. And other scholars, they said no, this is not merely a weak hadith, this is a very weak hadith. A very weak hadith is not permitted to link to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. So they have some difference of opinion with regards to its strength. But what we can say for sure from multiple sound hadith is the Prophet ﷺ taught the practice of fasting a lot, and Prophet ﷺ emphasized it a great deal. So no doubt there's going to be many benefits to this. First and foremost, spiritual benefits, inshallah ta'ala, and benefits related to the nafs and tahdhibun nafs, on trying to rectify one's state and spiritual state and the state of one's nafs and senses. But no doubt also it's going to have health benefits. And this is a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be it the fast, or be it the salah, or many other aspects of our worship. Not only do we have spiritual benefits from these things, but we also benefit physically, mentally, emotionally, many other benefits as well. And these are favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon us.
It's interesting you say that. So they benefit us in more than just spiritually ways, so physiologically as well.
Yeah.
But then I guess the aim of gaining that physiological benefit is that it enables you to engage in more spiritual worship.
Yeah, no doubt. And so, for example, when a person does a nafil fast, the primary intention should no doubt to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This should be the primary intention, inshallah ta'ala. But as well as that, a person can have the intention that this is good for my health. And one would then have the intention this is good for my health, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded me to take care of my health. So this will be a second intention, even though there's a personal benefit in it, but a person will be rewarded for it. Same with salah. A person who prays salah, primary intention is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is an action which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But again, a lot of physicians, they speak about the physical benefits of salah and the postures of salah. You see, and also no doubt there's a mental benefit, an emotional benefit, many benefits we derive from the salah and dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and many other things. So those are also intentions people can make, inshallah ta'ala, and benefits people get. Although we should remember the primary intention in everything is to first and foremost please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's an act of devotion and submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So just speaking about the attitude you have towards food as well. I mean, physicians and dietitians say that, once you've eaten a lot of food, or in particular when you've eaten carbohydrates, you start to feel lethargic afterwards because your body starts to focus more energy on trying to actually digest that food. So then, you can see how this is quite evidently affecting your spiritual state as well, and even your mental state, because your energy is diverted elsewhere, so you can't function as you'd like to if you were, for example, to go and pray after, or if you were to, even try and engage yourself in something which is going to be mentally challenging to you. You wouldn't be at your optimum performance.
This comes back to what we were speaking about before, not overeating. Because no doubt the more one eats, the more lethargic one is going to feel. So subhanallah, it comes back to that, and this is why I didn't comment on this. This is important. The hadith where the Prophet ﷺ spoke about a third for water, a third for food, and a third empty. They said that this will, many scholars, they commented on this, they said this is going to affect your ability to engage in ritual worship. And also some scholars also commented on the fact that it's precisely what you've mentioned, is the fact that if you overeat and then you try to study or what have you, it's going to be less effective. Because the body is busy with there's a huge amount of food that you've introduced to it, so it's going to be less effective. Doesn't mean a person can't do it, but it's going to be less effective. So yes, it has it affects many aspects of one's being.
Okay. So speaking about the topic of cruelty to animals and just trying to define what exactly is tayyib food. So you mentioned earlier tayyib in some of the ayat that you quoted. So Sidi, if we could just try and expound on this, please.
So a couple of things. First of all, the ayat I quoted earlier, they spoke about tayyibat, the pure things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with. And that no doubt refers to that which is halal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given. But in certain ayat of the Holy Quran, you also have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like for example Surah Baqarah ayah 168, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about halalan tayyiba. This is repeated in more than one place in the Holy Quran. Halalan tayyiba. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about halal tayyib. He mentions these two descriptions, halal and tayyib. So most scholars, many scholars, how do they understand this? They said this is an adjective, this is a sifa. Okay, that which is halal is tayyib. That which is halal is pure. Okay. Some other scholars, especially in our contemporary age, they speak about that halal is one description and tayyib is a slightly different, or speaking about slightly different aspect of it. So halal is obviously, as we understand, for the food to be halal, has to have go through a certain procedure and has to be devoid of certain things which are prohibited, like alcohol, for example. And tayyib, they said that this is something, because tayyib, as I translated earlier, is something which is good or pure. So they said that, this refers to the food itself, being, for example, treated well, is what we're going to speak about now, cruelty to animals and the production of food and such things. And obviously in our modern times, they speak about food being organic and, the issue of genetically modified food and these kind of things. They say that this comes under tayyib. And these are all, no doubt, valid considerations. Absolutely, they are valid considerations. So if we start off by speaking about the aspect of cruelty to animals is seen as a real concern in the Islamic teaching. Yes, no doubt about it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that He has created and subjugated animals for us. An'am in particular, domesticated animals. This is a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Domesticated animals, they've been subjugated and, we take benefit from them. See, food and other things is mentioned in the Holy Quran. So the point is, yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has subjugated them to us and they are seen as a blessing, but this doesn't give us the right to harm them. And you have numerous hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with regards to it, and with regards to rewards for people treating animals well, and punishment for people who mistreat animals. For example, you have a Sahih hadith in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned a woman went to hellfire for imprisoning a cat. She wouldn't feed her and she wouldn't let her go out and feed herself. So she went to hellfire as a result of this. And you have many, many other hadith besides. The hadith I've picked out and I wanted to quote, this is from Sahih Muslim, where the Prophet ﷺ saw an animal that had been branded. I'm sure the listeners are aware of what branding is. This is like with cattle and livestock. They heat up metal and they place this metal on the body of the animal as a mark that this belongs to them, to brand the animal. So this animal had been branded. This was a donkey, and it had been branded on the face. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah has cursed the one who brands an animal, and they understood this to mean in particular on the face. Many scholars, they said if there's a need for identification purposes or what have you, then it's permitted. But in particular, to do it in a way which is harmful, and to do it in a way, in this way which is incredibly cruel, this is how they understood it. Whereas the wording of the Prophet ﷺ, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ الَّذِي وَسَمَهُ, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curse the one who branded it. So, the point is, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon this person, despite the fact that the donkey is one of domesticated animals and we can take use from it. And this is a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but to mistreat it and to without any need to cause harm to an animal, this is considered severely prohibited. So, especially in our modern age, there's a certain this is something we should consider with regards to our diet and our food intake. So take, for example, eggs. You have an option between free-range eggs and eggs from caged hens. This is something we should give consideration to, and we should take the option which is best for the animals, inshaAllah ta'ala, as often as possible. Having said that, it doesn't make the food haram. You see, it doesn't make the food haram. So, eggs from caged animals, we're not going to say this egg is now haram. Or even some practices they have with chickens themselves, with poultry and chicken meat. The chicken's not treated very well at all, and live in really unacceptable circumstances. Again, it won't make the meat itself haram, but it's something we should give thought and consideration to. Firstly, because we don't accept cruelty to animals, and secondly, because of the impact it could have on the person who consumes it, in terms of, they speak about animals being injected with growth hormones and other things besides, and this could have an impact on the person that consumes it. So these are also considerations we should have, inshallah ta'ala.
And you mentioned at the start about organic foods as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a relatively modern phenomenon because of the rise of, the Industrial Revolution and these new farming practices, which just seem absurd when you start looking into them, where they pump all this vegetation full of all kinds of stuff to, keep the pests away and get it to grow in a certain way, in a certain fashion. I mean, surely we should be aware of these types of foods as well, and try and get sort of more closer to the source and more natural, and as you call it, organic foods as well.
Yeah, no doubt. These things we should give consideration to. Again, we're not speaking now about halal and haram.
Yeah.
We're not saying that non-organic food is haram or what have you. We're not speaking about halal and haram now. But we are, these are. We spoke earlier about the importance of one's health and the obligation to take care of one's health, and the importance of the food that we consume and such things. And this is yet another factor, and an important factor. It's something we should give consideration to. Where the food is coming from, the kind of processes it goes through, and all of the pesticides which are involved, and various other things. These are things that need to be a person should give consideration to, inshallah ta'ala. Yeah.
I mean, even you can just walk into a supermarket now and you can read the list of ingredients and some of the products that we have. Even some of the staple ingredients that we may eat, and consume, and it's just all sorts of numbers and chemicals and stuff put in there. I'm thinking, what is this stuff?
Exactly.
It doesn't even read like food. So
Yes,
should we really
absolutely.
even be eating this?
Yes.
I mean, like you said, not from a halal or haram perspective, but taking it back to us fulfilling our rights, our responsibilities towards our body. Sorry.
Yeah. No, this is absolutely something that should be given consideration. And inshallah, obviously it takes some research as well, but we should take time out and we should research these things, inshallah ta'ala, and we should try to understand, what is fact and what is rumour.
Yeah.
You see, and based on the facts, inshallah ta'ala, make informed decision with regards to the food that we consume, and give consideration to how it's going to affect our health and our well-being. Absolutely.
Sure. I guess you could sort of go to the other extreme where people become, so crazy about health and, diet and stuff, and that's all they do and all they think about. And, I guess you need to do it in moderation.
Yeah, should be done in moderation, but it's a valid consideration, a valid kind of thought process and valid research that people should be involved in, inshallah ta'ala, in their decisions with regards to what they consume.
Sure. So just touching on the prophetic guidance towards exercise, and activity, and I've got a hadith there which I want to just relate the translation of, which is reported in Muslim, where the translation of it is: the strong believer is better and more beloved to Allah than the weak believer, while there is good in both. So Sidi, could you just explain what this is actually alluding to?
Yeah.
This hadith there?
This is a very important hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and no doubt all scholars, they looked at this hadith and they understood it primarily to be referring to faith, iman, and the practice of one's Islam. That a person who has stronger faith is better than a person who has weaker faith. A person who practices the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more fully is better and more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the one who is weak. No doubt we will all have some weaknesses and some shortcomings. Only prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are free of sin and mistakes. But we will have these, so despite this we make tawbah and we continue and try our best, inshallah ta'ala. So this is how this all scholars that I've read commenting on this hadith, this is how they understood it. But some scholars went further, and some scholars said yes, this can also refer to the physical ability and physical strength, you see, and it has a relationship to that as well. So if you've got somebody a Muslim who is physically strong, physically healthy, then yes, this person has a benefit over the one who is not. And this may also refer to, obviously there are many considerations here, but may also relate to how beloved this person is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because if he's strong and healthy because he's been taking care of his body, and concerned with regards to what his food intake, concerned with regards to exercising the body sufficiently, because he sees this as an obligation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he's been doing it with that intention. No doubt he has huge reward here. So this is going to be applicable, absolutely. Obviously, it doesn't mean people who have illnesses or what have you, or weaknesses or disabilities or what have you, that they have no control over, that somehow these are more distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Doesn't mean that whatsoever. They're being tried, they're being tested. But what we would say, that it does relate to people who haven't taken sufficient care, haven't given consideration to their diet, haven't given consideration to exercising, haven't preserved the blessing and the favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, haven't given consideration to these things, and they've just let the body weaken, then yes, this is going to be applicable to them. So it should be understood with all of these various factors. But yes, there is an interpretation of this hadith which relates to physical strength, although the primary in understanding here relates to spiritual strength, inshallah ta'ala. No.
So just touching on the physical strength opinion here.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that one form of actually improving one's physical strength is to engage in sports.
Yeah.
And we understand that from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. There are some in particular that have been advocated, such as wrestling, horseback riding, swimming, and archery. And I've actually got a hadith here which is reported in Tabarani, which translates as, any action without the remembrance of Allah is either a diversion or heedlessness, excepting 4 acts: walking from target to target, and in parentheses it's saying during archery practice, training a horse, playing with one's family, and learning to swim. So I mean, from this hadith, could we say that you should in particular try and focus on these sports, or sort of take the message of focusing on sport in general, in that anything that keeps you fit and keeps your body healthy?
Yeah, this is how the ulama understood the issue of exercise, that which inshallah keeps one fit and allows one to exercise, inshallah ta'ala. This is the point here. However, they did point out that those which are being mentioned here in the hadith and in other various hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is they do more than just physical exercise.
Right.
Like for example, you have archery. You have many hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with regards to archery. Not only is there some exercise there are other skills which are involved, and also in their society this was important in life. When they had to, with regards to warfare, with regards to other things, it had its place there as well.
Yeah.
See, and swimming as well. Swimming is, having the ability to swim is very important. Could save a person's life.
Sure.
So, there's not just the exercise aspect, but there's something more. A very important skill for a person to gain, inshallah ta'ala. So that's, if a person can do it in a way where there's not only physically exercising the body, but there are other benefits besides, then no doubt there's greater reward therein. But yes, the exercising the body is very, very important. Sometimes people question that, why aren't there so many hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam speaking specifically about exercise and the importance of exercise and such things. And some scholars, they comment that this because their daily lives, they were, engaging in a lot of physical activity, and a lot of the things they were doing were very arduous. So they're getting that just as their daily life. Which nowadays, with the modern comforts and luxuries that we have, we don't necessarily get that. So there were no gyms in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. No need for them, because they would just go out and farm, and they'd get plenty of exercise. You see, and just train their animals, for example, they get plenty of exercise. Whereas nowadays it's not the case. So this is, answers that question. Why don't you have the Prophet ﷺ, since exercise is so important? We know it's very important to exercise. Why don't you have lots of hadith of the Prophet ﷺ emphasizing? Because this was part of their daily life. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam Muhammad, it was done. And despite that fact, we have hadith, as you've quoted. We have some hadith, the Prophet ﷺ spoke about this. So this is incredibly important. And this is, something I often mention in my classes is with regards to the Islamic teaching. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this the deen that He revealed to us, He deals with all aspects of the human being, the mind, the body, the soul. We have nourishment and we have exercise for all of them.
Yeah.
And it's something that we should be aware of. And for a human being to be happy, inshallah ta'ala, and fulfilled in this life, and inshallah benefit in the next life also, we need to give consideration to all aspects. So we have the spiritual, and many people, they recognize this right away. You have many spiritual activities in Islam, to spiritual exercise, if you like, spiritual nourishment, if you like. We have the prayer, we have fasting, we have dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have dua, we have recitation of Quran, many things which are there to nourish the spiritual aspect of the human being. And then we have the mental, which is often missed out by people. In Islam, studying is given huge importance. See, to be people that study, people that learn, people that research, people that read. I spoke about this over many of our programs in the past. That's important because the brain, the mind, it needs its nourishment. You see, if it's not nourished, if it's not exercised, a person cannot be fulfilled in this life. And then you have the physical as well. See, with regards to the physical element, physical exercise is required. And consideration for physical nourishment is also required, as we've been speaking about today. And if a person neglects any one of these three, this person cannot be fully satisfied or fulfilled or even find true happiness in this life, because he's neglecting an important aspect of his own being. Now, the human being is primarily soul, but also has mind and also has the body, and these three things, all three of these need to be given consideration.
Jazakallah khair, Sayyidi. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.